The watch was the last good thing I had. A 1958 Patek Philippe Calatrava, its slim gold case and clean white face a study in quiet elegance. It had been my grandfather's. Now it lived in a worn leather box in my sock drawer, a silent, ticking monument to a life of stability I couldn't seem to replicate. My own life was a series of carefully managed declines. A dead-end data entry job that paid just enough to cover the rent on this small, tired apartment, also inherited. A diet of rice and beans that was more necessity than choice. A solitude so profound it had begun to feel like a physical presence in the room. I took the watch out sometimes, late at night when the city sounds were muted and the loneliness was sharpest. I'd wind it, the tiny, precise clicks of sound from a more ordered world. I'd feel the weight of it in my palm, the cool metal a connection to my grandfather's warm, steady hand. He had been a man of quiet routines and deep integrity. I felt I was failing him with every passing day, letting his legacy thin out into my own threadbare existence. The watch wasn't just an object. It was my emergency fund, my escape plan, the final barrier between me and true desperation. Selling it felt like severing the last tie to the man I'd wanted to become. For months, I'd walked past Silas Blackwood and Sons, a jeweler's shop downtown with a discreet, dark green awning and a single, perfect timepiece displayed in its window. The name itself sounded old and reliable, like the institutions my grandfather had trusted. I'd press my nose to the glass like a child, admiring the craftsmanship, but the thought of pushing open the heavy oak door filled me with a sense of profound inadequacy. I didn't belong in a place like that. Then the pipe burst, a cascade of rust-colored water that ruined the downstairs neighbor's ceiling and left me with a special assessment notice that might as well have been a death sentence. $3,700. An impossible sum. My careful budget shattered. My meager savings evaporated. There were no more options. The watch, my last good thing, had to go. My hand shook as I placed the leather box into my worn satchel. It felt less like a transaction and more like a surrender. Pushing open the door to Silas Blackwood and Sons was like stepping into another era. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint, clean scent of polished wood, metal, and something else, something like old paper and leather. It smelled of history. A quiet chime announced my arrival, but the man behind the gleaming glass counter didn't look up immediately. He was bent over a small, intricate piece of machinery, a loop fixed to his eye. He moved with a focused grace that was mesmerizing. When he finally straightened and removed the loop, his eyes found mine. They were a deep, thoughtful gray, set in a face that was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with character. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with thick, salt and pepper hair swept back from his forehead. He wore a simple, dark suit of impeccable cut, the kind of clothing that disappears to let you see the man wearing it. "Good morning," he said. His voice was low and resonant, a calm sound in a calm room. It settled some of the frantic buzzing in my chest. "Morning," I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. I approached the counter and unzipped my satchel, my fingers fumbling with the clasp of the leather box. I placed it on the soft velvet pad on the counter and pushed it forward. He looked at the box, then back at me, his gaze assessing but not unkind. He didn't rush me. He simply waited. I opened the lid. The watch gleamed under the soft, focused lights of the shop, looking impossibly elegant against the worn velvet of its case. The man, Silas Blackwood, I presumed, drew in a soft, appreciative breath. He reached for a pair of cotton gloves and a soft cloth before he even thought of touching it. His hands were what I noticed next. They were clean and capable, with long, steady fingers. Hands that knew how to fix broken things. He lifted the watch with a reverence that felt like a personal courtesy to my grandfather. "This is a beautiful piece," he said, his voice quiet. He turned it over, his eyes scanning the case back, the lugs, the crown. "May I ask its story?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected questions about serial numbers, about papers, about price. Not about its story. "It was my grandfather's," I said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. "I see," he said, and the way he said it, with a gentle nod, made me feel that he did. He looked from the watch to my face, and for the first time, his professional gaze softened into something warmer, something more personal. It felt like being truly seen, and in my threadbare coat and frayed nerves, it was both a comfort and a terror. Silas Blackwood explained that a proper appraisal would take time. For a piece of this quality and provenance, he said, his voice maintaining its even, calming tone, I can't give you an honest valuation in 5 minutes. I need to research the serial number, examine the movement under magnification, and check its service history, if any records exist. I must have looked as panicked as I felt, my one hope for immediate salvation dissolving into a bureaucratic delay. He seemed to read my expression perfectly. Please, he said, gesturing to a comfortable leather armchair in the corner of the shop. Sit. This won't take all day, but it must be done correctly. For both our sakes, he offered me a glass of water, which I accepted with a grateful nod, my throat suddenly dry as dust. I settled into the chair while he moved to a small, immaculate workbench at the back of the shop. It was a world unto itself, a miniature landscape of tiny tools and neat racks, small labeled drawers, and a powerful-looking microscope. He laid the watch on a soft leather pad and began to work, his focus absolute. The shop was silent except for the gentle ticking of a large regulator clock on the wall and the nearly imperceptible sounds of Silas's work. The whisper of a soft brush, the quiet click of a case opener, the soft whir of a polishing wheel used on some other piece. I watched him, completely captivated. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of decades of practice. There was no wasted effort, no hesitation, just a deep, abiding competence. It was strangely intimate, sitting in this quiet, luxurious space, watching this stranger handle the most precious thing I owned. He was treating my grandfather's watch not as a commodity, but as a piece of history, an artifact worthy of respect. With every careful movement, he was honoring the man who had worn it. It eased an ache in my chest I hadn't even known was there. Occasionally, he would look up from his work, his gray eyes meeting mine across the room. He'd offer a small, reassuring smile, a silent communication that said, "It's all right. I'm taking care of it." He was aware of my anxiety, of the desperate energy I was radiating, and he was subtly, skillfully managing it without a word. He was creating a space of safety around a moment of pure terror for me. My mind, however, was a frantic storm of calculation and fear. I was analyzing every flicker of his expression, every pause. When he first opened the case back and peered at the movement, his eyebrows lifted slightly. Was that good? Bad? Did he find a flaw? A forgery? My stomach twisted into a knot. I felt the immense, unbridgeable chasm between our lives. He was a man surrounded by timeless, beautiful things, a curator of legacies. I was a man selling his own legacy to fix a plumbing problem. The shame was a hot flush on my cheeks. I stared down at my worn sneakers, at the frayed cuff of my jeans. What must he think of me? A desperate kid, and over his head. I wondered if he had ever known what it was like to be this close to the edge, to have his entire future dependent on the cold, hard value of a single object. I felt a powerful, inexplicable pull toward him, a respect for his craft, an admiration for his quiet dignity, but it was tangled up with a profound sense of my own inadequacy. He was a pillar of a world I could only press my nose against from the outside. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 45 minutes, he laid down his tools. He carefully reassembled the watch, wiped it with a soft cloth, and walked back to the counter. He placed it gently on the velvet pad between us. The air grew thick with anticipation. "It's genuine," he said, his voice calm and steady. "And in remarkable condition. The movement is clean. It's been well cared for." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "Based on current auction records and the condition of this particular reference number, its market value is somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000. The number didn't register at first. It was just a sound. Then it landed, a physical weight in the center of my chest. I couldn't speak. It was more than the repair. It was more than I'd made in the last year. It was life-changing. It was an escape. I don't know what to say," I stammered. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly. He slid the watch across the counter toward me. "Take a moment." As I reached for it, my trembling fingers brushed against his. His hand was warm, the skin smooth, but the grip beneath it felt strong, solid. The contact sent a tiny, electric shock up my arm. It was brief, almost certainly accidental, but it grounded me in the room, in the moment. He didn't pull his hand away immediately. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second, a soft pressure against mine. Our eyes met, and in that moment, the sterile air of the shop became charged with something else entirely. Something unspoken and deeply human. The transaction was no longer just about a watch, or about money. It was about this quiet, steady man and the unexpected current that flowed between us. I stared at the watch, the number Silas had named echoing in my head. It was a lifeline. It was freedom. My immediate instinct was to say, I'll take it. 25,000. Anything. Please. The words were right on the tip of my tongue, born of pure, animal desperation. But Silas spoke first, his voice pulling me back from the ledge. This is a significant piece, he said, his tone measured and thoughtful. It deserves a considered sale, not a desperate one. He looked me directly in the eye, and I had the distinct feeling he could see right through my flimsy composure to the panic churning beneath. He made an offer that completely blindsided me. I can offer you a loan against the watch's value, he said. Enough to cover your immediate needs. Say for $1,000. No interest. No timetable for repayment. You can take care of your emergency, and then you can decide what to do with the watch itself when you're not under pressure. You can sell it to me, sell it elsewhere, or keep it. The choice will be yours, made with a clear head. I was stunned into silence. It was an act of such unexpected kindness, such profound decency, that I didn't know how to process it. My mind, so accustomed to the harsh calculus of survival, immediately searched for the catch. Nobody was this generous. Why? I asked, the word coming out as a choked whisper. Because, he said simply, I've seen that look on a man's face before. And my business is preserving beautiful things, not profiting from misfortune. He gestured again to the chair. Let's sit down. I can draw up a simple agreement. Everything will be transparent. The dynamic in the room shifted entirely. We were no longer a jeweler and a desperate seller. We were two men, sitting at his elegant but functional desk, working together to solve a problem. He took out a single sheet of paper and a fountain pen, and in clear, simple language, wrote out the terms of the loan. He explained each line, ensuring I understood. There was no fine print, no hidden clauses. It was an agreement built on trust. As I watched his pen move across the page in elegant, controlled script, I felt a small island of calm forming in the middle of my chaotic life. He was building it for me, right there in his quiet, orderly shop. As I was signing the paper, my hand still not entirely steady, he leaned back in his chair. His professional demeanor softened, the quiet reserve in his eyes giving way to a gentle curiosity. Your grandfather, he said, his voice softer than before. He must have been a very special man to you. The directness of the question, the genuine interest in it, broke through my defenses. I had come here to sell a piece of my past, and instead, this stranger was inviting me to share it. I found myself talking, the words spilling out. I told him about my grandfather's quiet strength, his calloused hands that could fix anything, the smell of sawdust and pipe tobacco that clung to his old wool sweaters. I told him how my grandfather had been my only real anchor after my parents died, the one person who had made me feel safe in the world. It was more than I had spoken about him, about myself, to anyone in years. Silas listened without interruption, his gaze never leaving my face. He wasn't just hearing the words, he was absorbing them. When I finally trailed off, feeling exposed and a little foolish for my outburst, he didn't offer platitudes or pity. He offered understanding. Good men are rare, he said, his voice imbued with a quiet gravity. And the things they leave behind, they're more than just objects. They're anchors. He looked away for a moment, toward the ticking clocks on the wall. I worry sometimes, he confessed, almost to himself, that people see me as just a merchant of expensive things. They don't see the stories I'm trying to preserve. That small admission of his own vulnerability, his own professional loneliness, was a revelation. It cracked the stoic facade and showed me the man beneath. It was a bridge across the chasm I had imagined between us. He wasn't just a wealthy jeweler. He was a custodian of memories, a man who understood the weight of the past. He then looked back at me, his expression serious and clear. I want you to be certain about this, Leo, he said, using my name for the first time. This loan is a business transaction between us. What you decide about the watch later is a separate matter. And any friendship that might develop, he chose the word carefully, is separate from both. I will never use one to influence the other. His statement was a gift. It was an explicit declaration of his ethical boundaries, a reassurance that his kindness was not a hook. He was giving me not just money, but agency. He was respecting my independence at the moment I felt I had the least of it. In that quiet, sunlit shop, surrounded by the gentle ticking of time, I felt a profound sense of gratitude that was so overwhelming it almost felt like hope. In the weeks that followed, the world shifted on its axis. The loan from Silas was in my account the next day. I paid the building assessment, and the sound of workmen repairing the damage below was the sound of a crisis averted. For the first time in years, a small measure of peace settled over me. I had breathing room. I could buy groceries without calculating every penny. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in my chest began to fade. My gratitude towards Silas was immense, a warm and constant presence in my thoughts. But it was tangled with something else, something more complex and unsettling. I found myself replaying our conversation, the feel of his fingers brushing mine, the gentle sincerity in his eyes when he spoke of my grandfather. It was a confusing mix of admiration, attraction, and a deep-seated fear of the power imbalance between us. He was a man of means and stature. I was a young man living on the edge of poverty. The sheer cliff face of our differences seemed insurmountable. I had to return to the shop to sign a final receipt for the loan agreement, a formality he had insisted upon for my own records. I put it off for a few days, rehearsing the polite, grateful speech I would make, a speech designed to neatly conclude our business and allow me to retreat back into my solitary life. When I finally worked up the nerve to go, the little bell above the door chimed, and I saw Silas was with another customer. This man was the polar opposite of Silas's quiet dignity. He was loud, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed to be wearing him, and he was arguing over the price of a watch repair. "It's outrageous, Blackwood," the man blustered. "You're charging a fortune. The price reflects the hours required and the rarity of the parts, Mr. Henderson," Silas replied, his voice perfectly even, betraying no hint of frustration. The man, Henderson, scoffed. "You're too soft, Blackwood. Always have been. You let sentiment get in the way of good business." He snatched the repaired watch from the counter and stormed out, the bell jangling angrily in his wake. Silas stood for a moment, his back to me, his shoulders slumping just slightly. He looked tired, the impeccable professional mask frayed at the edges. Then he turned and saw me standing by the door. His expression transformed instantly. The weariness vanished, replaced by a genuine, unforced warmth that seemed to fill the quiet space between us. "Leo," he said, his voice soft, "I'm glad you're here." That stark contrast, the abrasive cynicism of the world he dealt with, and the gentle welcome he reserved for me, struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was a protective gesture in itself. He straightened his tie, his composure settling back into place like a well-worn coat. "Don't mind that," he said, with a small, wry smile. "Some people measure the world only in dollars. It's a very small ruler." We moved to his desk to handle the paperwork. A comfortable, companionable silence fell between us, but the air was thick with everything we weren't saying. The formal business of our transaction was concluded, and we were left in a new, undefined territory. I felt a familiar urge to flee, to thank him profusely and disappear before I made a fool of myself. But then Silas put down his pen. He folded his hands on the desk and looked at me, his gray eyes clear and direct. There was no artifice in his gaze, no pretense. "The loan is settled," he said, his voice even and calm. "You have no further obligation to me. I want you to know that." He paused, and the silence stretched, full of weight. "But I find myself hoping this isn't the last time you'll walk through that door." It wasn't a question, but it hung in the air, demanding an answer. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the crossroads. I could retreat into the safety of polite gratitude, murmur something about being in touch, and leave. Or I could take a single, terrifying step forward onto the bridge he was holding out for me. I thought of my lonely apartment, of the endless, silent evenings. I thought of the warmth in this man's eyes. I took a deep breath, the clean, cool air of the shop filling my lungs. "I was hoping that too," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. A slow, beautiful smile spread across Silas's face, reaching his eyes and making them shine. The relief in his expression was palpable, and it mirrored my own. "Good," he said, the single word full of meaning. "Then perhaps we could have dinner. As two men, not as a jeweler and a client." He held up a hand, preempting any protest I might have about cost. "My treat," he said firmly, "but your choice of place. I want you to be comfortable." With that simple, thoughtful condition, he was already working to level the ground between us. He was acknowledging the power imbalance and actively dismantling it, piece by piece. He was giving me control, giving me a voice. And I knew, with a sudden, startling clarity, that I wanted to use it. I wanted to see where this path would lead. I chose a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from the shop. It was a place I'd only ever walked past, admiring the warm glow from its windows, a place I could never have afforded on my own. But it wasn't ostentatious or intimidating. It felt cozy and real. By choosing it, I was trying to meet him somewhere in the middle, a place that was a step up for me, but not so grand as to feel like his world entirely. He seemed to understand, nodding his approval when I suggested it. "An excellent choice," he said, his smile genuine. Dinner was surprisingly easy. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from the intricacies of watchmaking to books we'd read, to the quiet absurdities of life in the city. Silas was a wonderful storyteller, his observations on people and life sharpened by years of quiet observation from behind his counter. He listened as much as he talked, asking thoughtful questions that made me feel like my opinions, my small life, truly mattered. The tension that had hummed between us and the shop eased into a warm, comfortable thrum of mutual interest. But as the evening wore on, as the plates were cleared and coffee was served, the unspoken thing between us returned, settling in the space between our hands on the table. We had navigated the superficial. Now, we were on the edge of something deeper, and the silence was charged with it. I knew the next move had to be mine. He had opened the door, but I had to be the one to walk through it. My courage, bolstered by the wine and the warmth of his company, felt like a small, flickering candle flame. I had to protect it, to use it before it went out. I took a sip of coffee, the cup rattling slightly in its saucer. "Silas," I began, my voice a little shaky. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I need to be honest. When I first came to your shop, I was just desperate. The loan, your kindness, it saved me. And I'm so incredibly grateful." I paused, taking a breath. "But now, it's not about the watch anymore. It's not about the money." I looked down at my hands, twisted in my lap. "It's about you." The confession hung in the air, raw and terrifying. I had laid my heart bare, with no idea how it would be received. The silence stretched for a beat, an eternity. Then, I felt a gentle warmth cover my hand on the table. Silas had reached across, his fingers lacing through mine. His touch was firm, steady, a safe harbor. I looked up. His expression was serious, his gray eyes full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Leo," he said, his voice low and certain, "it has been about you for me since the moment you told me your grandfather's name." My breath caught in my throat. I saw the way you held that watch. I saw the history in your eyes. I saw the man you are, underneath the worry. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "I have wanted this, more than I can say, but I needed to be absolutely sure you felt free to choose it, that it wasn't gratitude or a sense of obligation that was guiding you." The sheer relief that flooded through me was dizzying. It wasn't one-sided. This quiet, dignified, incredible man felt the same pull I did. We left the restaurant and walked through the cool night air. The city was alive around us, but we were in our own bubble. Our hands were linked, a simple, profound connection that felt more real than anything I had experienced in a long time. He walked me not to my apartment, but back toward his shop. "I live upstairs," he said simply, an invitation and a statement of fact all in one. Inside the shop, the darkness was soft and welcoming. The only light was the pale moonlight filtering through the large front window, and the only sound was the gentle, hypnotic ticking of dozens of clocks, all marking time together. The air smelled of wood and oil and history. "Our history now?" Silas turned to face me. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair, etching his strong features in shadow and light. He didn't rush. He moved with the same deliberate, unhurried grace he applied to his work. He lifted a hand, his fingers warm against my skin to cup my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch. His eyes searched mine, asking a final, silent question. I leaned into his touch. It is my answer, my consent, my choice. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion or pin-up demand. It was a kiss of arrival. It was soft and sure, deep and unhurried. It tasted of coffee and wine and the sweet, overwhelming relief of being truly seen. It felt like every scattered, broken piece of me was being gently gathered and put back into place. It felt like coming home. We broke apart, but only by a few inches, our foreheads resting against each other. The chorus of ticking clocks seemed to fade into a single, steady heartbeat. Mine, or his, I couldn't tell. They were beating as one. I could feel his breath on my lips, warm and even. "Keep the watch, Leo," Silas whispered, his voice a low vibration against my skin. "It's your anchor, your history." He paused, and I felt his fingers tighten in mine. "And if you'll have me, keep me too." I woke to the unfamiliar feeling of soft, high-thread count sheets and the quiet hum of a city waking up outside a large window. Sunlight streamed into a bedroom that was the epitome of tasteful, understated luxury. It was a room filled with books, art, and the quiet presence of the man who owned them. My clothes were neatly folded on a chair. I was in Silas's apartment, in his bed, and a cold, sharp tendril of panic began to curl in my stomach. The reality of our situation came crashing down on me. I was a nearly broke 20-something who had just spent the night with a wealthy, successful man almost twice my age. A man to whom I was, until recently, financially indebted. The optics, as Silas himself had said, were not great. What did this make me? The younger man, kept by a rich patron? The thought was a splash of icy water, mortifying and deeply unsettling. I could hear him moving around in the other room, the clink of ceramic, the sound of water running. I slipped out of bed and pulled on my jeans and shirt, feeling like an intruder, an imposter in this calm, well-ordered world. When I walked into the kitchen, Silas was standing by the counter, pouring hot water into a French press. He was already dressed in trousers and a soft cashmere sweater, looking as elegant and put together as ever. He turned and smiled at me, but it was a careful smile, a little distant. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but measured. "Coffee?" He seemed to sense my unease. He didn't crowd me, didn't rush to close the physical space between us. He simply handed me a heavy ceramic mug and gestured to the small bistro table by the window, giving me a wide berth. His perception was a double-edged sword. It was a relief not to be smothered, but the space he was giving me also felt like a chasm. Was he having second thoughts? Did I look cheap and out of place in the morning light? The anxieties I thought had been soothed by his kiss the night before came roaring back to life. We sat in silence for a few moments, sipping our coffee, the unspoken tension thick in the air. Finally, Silas set his mug down with a soft click and looked directly at me. His expression was serious, but kind. "Leo," he began, his tone gentle but firm, cutting straight through the noise in my head. "I know this is a lot to process. The differences between our lives are not lost on me. I want to be very clear about something." He held my gaze, and there was nothing but sincerity in his eyes. "You and I are equals in this. My money, my age, they are just context. They are not the foundation. We are the foundation." The conviction in his voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. He wasn't dismissing my fears. He was acknowledging them, meeting them head-on. "Your grandfather's watch is yours," he continued, his words deliberate and clear. "And the loan is forgiven. It was never a loan, not really. Consider it a gift, with no strings attached, from one man to another who needed a bit of help. But your independence is also yours. That is the most important thing. I would never, ever want to compromise that." He then made an offer that was so thoughtful, so perfectly attuned to my deepest anxieties, that it took my breath away. "I have a small workspace in the back of the shop," he said. "It was my father's old office. I rarely use it. It has a good desk, good light. If you ever wanted a quiet place to work on your own projects, writing, sketching, whatever you do, away from your apartment, it's there for you. No rent, no conditions, just a space. It would be separate from this." He gestured around his apartment, "and separate from us. A place that is yours to use as you see fit." The brilliance of the offer was in its structure. He was using his resources not to bind me to him, but to empower me. He was giving me a space that was mine, a foothold of independence within his world, but not owned by it. It was an act of profound respect. He wasn't just saying we were equals. He was actively creating the conditions for us to be equals. The knot of fear in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a wave of awe at his emotional intelligence, at his care. In the weeks that followed, we began to build something new and tentative. I started using the small back office, a quiet sanctuary where I could work on my portfolio and apply for better jobs, away from the cramped confines of my apartment. Silas was true to his word. He never intruded, never asked what I was doing. He would simply leave a cup of coffee on the desk for me in the mornings if I was there early, a silent gesture of support. Our time together was separate, dinners out, quiet evenings in his apartment talking for hours, walks through the city. We were learning the rhythm of each other's lives, slowly, carefully. One afternoon, I was in the main part of the shop, waiting for Silas to finish with a supplier, when one of his regular clients came in. She was an older woman, dripping in jewels and an air of bored entitlement. Her name was Mrs. Gable, and her eyes, sharp and bird-like, took in the scene immediately. Silas, smiling at me from behind the counter. Me, comfortable and at ease in a space where I clearly didn't belong by birthright. While Silas was in the back room retrieving a piece for her, she turned her attention to me. Her smile was thin, painted on. "You're here a lot lately," she observed, her tone light, but edged with steel. "Silas is such a generous man, always taking in strays." The word, strays, landed like a slap. It was everything I feared, everything I fought against feeling, articulated in a single, condescending word. I felt the blood rush to my face, a hot tide of shame and anger. I was speechless, my carefully constructed sense of equality crumbling. Just then, Silas returned. He took one look at my face, then at Mrs. Gable's smug expression, and he understood instantly. He didn't challenge her, didn't create a scene. His response was a masterpiece of quiet, decisive action. He placed the velvet box on the counter, then walked around it to stand beside me. He put a steadying hand on my shoulder, a simple, public gesture of alliance. "Leo," he said, his voice warm and clear, easily overriding the tension in the room. "Would you join me for lunch? I'd like your opinion on the new bistro down the street." It was an invitation, but it was also a statement. "He is with me." He then turned his polite, impenetrable gaze on the woman. "Mrs. Gable, we'll have to continue this later." My apologies. Without waiting for a reply, he guided me gently toward the door, his hand a firm, protective weight on my back. He had extracted me from the situation, publicly claimed me, and validated my presence, all without a single angry word. He had protected me, not by fighting my battle for me, but by standing with me in it. Outside on the pavement, blinking in the bright afternoon sun, I felt a fierce, protective love for him that was utterly new and completely overwhelming. That evening, sitting in the quiet comfort of his apartment, the incident with Mrs. Gable hung between us. I finally found the words to tell him how her comment had made me feel. The shame, the anger, the confirmation of all my deepest insecurities about our relationship. Silas didn't dismiss my feelings. He listened, his expression serious, and when I was finished, he reached for my hand. "Her words have nothing to do with you, Leo," he said firmly. "They are a reflection of her own small, brittle world. But I understand why they hurt." He paused, choosing his words with care. "People will talk. They will always try to write stories for other people, especially when they see something they don't understand. Their stories are small. What matters is the story we write together." And in that moment, we made a conscious choice. We decided to build our foundation deliberately, brick by brick, strong enough to withstand the opinions of others. We talked about boundaries, about how to navigate the inevitable challenges of our age and financial differences. We agreed that his apartment and my apartment would remain our own separate spaces for now, that our time together would be an active choice, not a default assumption. It was about preserving our independence while building our intimacy. As a sign of this, he gave me a key. Not to his apartment, not yet. He gave me a key to the shop's back entrance, the one that led to the small workspace he'd given me. The distinction was crucial. It was a key that signified trust and access, but to a space that was mine, reinforcing my autonomy. It was an offering of partnership, not possession. It was the most romantic gesture I had ever known. A month passed, then two. A quiet, comfortable rhythm settled between us. I found a new job, a graphic design position that was a huge step up from my old data entry gig. It was still a modest salary, but it was mine, earned through the work I did in the quiet back office of the jewelry shop. I was standing on my own 2 feet, and Silas was my biggest cheerleader, his pride in me a quiet, steady warmth. One Sunday morning, I let myself into the workspace early. The shop was dark and silent, filled with the ghosts of ticking clocks. I spread my sketchbook on the old wooden desk and lost myself in my work. Some time later, I felt a presence and looked up. Silas was standing in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. He didn't speak, didn't want to interrupt my flow. He simply smiled, placed one mug on the corner of my desk, and leaned against the doorframe, watching me work with a look of such profound, gentle affection on his face that it made my heart ache. Later, we went upstairs to his kitchen. The space that had once felt so intimidatingly has now felt ours. We moved around each other with an easy, unspoken choreography, making breakfast together. I chopped vegetables while he whisked eggs, our shoulders brushing, our hands occasionally touching as we reached for the same utensil. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. There was no grand passion, no dramatic declarations. There was just a deep, settled peace, a feeling of rightness, the quiet hum of 2 lives slotting perfectly together. It felt, more than anything else, like arrival. The story ends here, but it also begins here. I'm sitting on the small balcony of Silas's apartment, a place that has started to feel as much like home as my own. The city is humming to life below us. Silas is beside me, reading the newspaper, the pages rustling softly in the morning breeze. Every so often, his shoulder brushes against mine, a small, grounding point of contact. I look down at my own wrist. I'm wearing my grandfather's watch. For the first time, it doesn't feel like an emergency fund or a heavy link to a past I couldn't live up to. It's just a watch. A beautiful object that reminds me of a good man, a solid anchor to my own history. But it is no longer my only anchor. I think about the things that once seemed like insurmountable barriers between us. The years, the money, the difference in our stations. They haven't vanished. They are still part of the context of our lives. But they are no longer the cage I once imagined them to be. They are simply facts, like the color of his eyes or the sound of his laugh. Silas's resources gave us the space to meet, but it was his character, his integrity, his respect, his quiet and unwavering care that built this foundation beneath us. I am less afraid now. I feel steady, grounded in a way I never have before. I am not a stray he took in. I am a man he chose, a partner he respects. And I chose him, freely and completely. He looks up from his paper, as if sensing my thoughts, and his eyes meet mine. He gives me a soft, knowing smile, a smile that says he understands it all, the journey, the fears, the quiet joy of this simple morning. I smile back, a feeling of profound gratitude settling deep in my bones. I have kept the watch. I have kept the man. And in doing so, in allowing myself to be loved so carefully and so well, I have finally, truly found myself. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.